Hi everyone, I'm ANEKA from Made to Sew and welcome to my bicep adjustment tutorial. Now in this tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to decrease the size of a bicep in the dressmaking pattern. Now we're going to begin by looking at how to measure your bicep because you're going to want to start by measuring the bicep and comparing that to the dressmaking pattern that you're working with. I'm going to be showing you how I would take a measurement on myself and also how to do it on a mannequin. To measure the bicep, you're going to want to measure the largest area between the elbow and the shoulder, right over that bicep muscle. You want to position the tape measure around the arm and you want to make sure that it's a nice snug measurement so it's against the skin. It's not too loose, I can't get any fingers under there, but that I'm not pulling it too tight either. If you're taking a measurement on yourself or on somebody else, I recommend that you ask them to bend their arm, position their hand on their waist or on their hip. If you're measuring yourself, do it in front of a mirror so that you can see that you're measuring the largest part of your bicep. You're then going to want to take the measurement on the largest part between your elbow and your underarm, right over your bicep muscle. Take a snug measurement around this area. You don't want to be pulling the tape measure tight, and you don't want to leave it so loose that you could position a finger underneath it. Take a snug measurement and record it. And it's always a good idea to check the measurement on both sides and use the largest. You may find that you do have one arm that's slightly larger than the other. Now you know your bicep measurement, you can compare this to the finished garment measurement of the pattern that you're working with. Unfortunately, not all patterns actually display the finished garment measurement for the bicep area, but you could remove the seam allowances from the pattern if they include the seam allowances and take a measurement of that bicep so that you can compare it to the size of your measurement. Now, what should the difference be between your bicep and the bicep on the pattern that you're working with? And this really depends on a lot of things. It depends on the style of the garment that you're making, the fabric that it was designed to be made in, and the fabric that you're working with. So let's say a minimum amount of ease that you need, so the difference between your bicep measurement and the bicep of the pattern in a woven non-stretch fabric for sort of a very fitted nice sleeve is probably about 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters. However, you can obviously have more ease than that. You're going to have a less fitted sleeve. And you can have less ease than that if you're working with a stretch fabric. You can even have negative ease. So the bicep could be smaller than your bicep measurement if you're working with a very stretchy fabric and you want that sleeve to give you a snug fit, like you have with a long-sleeved snug t-shirt. So what are the key things to look for if you've already made a garment and you think that perhaps it's a little bit too big in the bicep area? Let's take a look at the key things you can look for to see if you should be making a bicep adjustment and decreasing the size of that bicep. Check the fit of the sleeve around your arm. Is there too much or too little fabric around the upper part of the arm and the bicep area? If there is too much fabric, it may look like your arm is simply swimming in fabric. You may find that you almost have a drooping and folds of fabric coming down from the top of the shoulder. The shoulder will be in the right place. The armhole might even be correct for you, but there is simply too much fabric around the bicep. In that case, we can adjust it by decreasing the size of the bicep of the pattern that you're working with. So now you understand the ease in the pattern and also what to look for if you need to do a bicep adjustment. I'm going to be showing you a couple of different techniques in this tutorial. We're going to be looking at how to do a minor adjustment. However, this adjustment can also affect the bodice, the armhole of the bodice. Then I'm going to be showing you how to do another adjustment where we can decrease the bicep of the pattern right at the center bicep of that sleeve. This can be really useful because it means that we're not affecting the size of the armhole if that works for you. Generally speaking, I take about a maximum of 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters in this technique, but I do show you how to take more and the corrections that you will need to do if you need to take more in the bicep area. I also have another tutorial that I'm going to be launching in a couple of weeks where I show you how to take up to about 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters. It's another method that you can use if you do need to make a drastic amendment to your bicep. Finally, we will look at how you would adjust a short sleeve, and hopefully then you will feel able to tackle sleeves and adjust the bicep by decreasing it if you need to. So grab the pattern that you're working with and we can begin. Now, throughout this tutorial, I'm working with my free Copen pattern sleeve, but it really doesn't matter what sleeve you're working with. The same rules will apply here. So we're going to start and I'm going to show you how to make a very minor adjustment if you wish to decrease the bicep. Then we're going to look at what you would need to do if you wish to make a more major adjustment and you don't want to change the size of the armhole. And finally, I'm going to share with you some tips for if you had a short sleeve. So you can clearly see that the bicep line is marked on my pattern here. But what if the bicep line isn't marked on your pattern? Well, you can find the bicep line by simply removing the seam allowance from the sleeve cap around these areas and also from this underarm seam. Obviously, if your pattern doesn't have seam allowances on, then there's no need to do that. And you would simply take a straight line from the corner of where these seam allowances meet to the corner on the other side. And this line should be at a right angle to the grain line, and that gives you your bicep line. So that's the line that we are trying to decrease the amount because this sleeve is too large in the bicep for you. So if we wanted to take a minor adjustment, we could simply remove a small amount from both of these sides here. Now, the maximum amount that you will want to remove is about 3/8 or 1 centimetre from each side. And obviously by doing this, you may need to make this amendment to the garment as well, which is going to make the armhole smaller. So let's take a look at an example. If I use my green Sharpie here just to show you, I would simply measure in my 3/8, and it doesn't matter if you're doing this with or without seam allowances, but obviously if you do it without seam allowances, you will need to add your seam allowances on afterwards or draw them onto your fabric, whatever works for you. Now I'm going to measure in here 3/8 or 1 centimetre at this top area, and then I'm going to take a straight line so that it blends back in to the edge of my sleeve. Now you might not find that you need to do that. You might be able to take this amount off all the way down the sleeve. It really depends on your shape and how the rest of the sleeve is fitting you. So for now I have just gone for a straight line and blended that back in at the elbow area. And obviously if you needed that adjustment in the front, you would need to do that there as well. Now, if you've made an adjustment at the back sleeve here, you will probably need to make that same adjustment to the back bodice. You may find that you can ease the sleeve into the armhole as it is, but generally speaking, it will be better and you'll have better results if you make that amendment to the back bodice as well. So here I would simply come in by the same amount. You would come in by the 3/8, 1.5 centimetres, and then I would again try to aim for a point down the side seam where I could remove or blend that line back into the garment. And obviously if you need to do this on the front, you would do the same thing on the front pattern. And once you've made the amendments, you would need to true the pattern to make sure that the sleeve fitted into the armhole correctly. Now that's a nice, simple and easy method to make a minor change to the bicep. I generally only use that method if I need to perhaps remove a small amount, so say 1/8, a couple of millimetres, something like that. This next method keeps the size of the armhole the same, if that works for you, and removes fabric right in the centre of the bicep here. So I generally find that this is an easier and better method. The first step is that you're going to want to draw your stitching line around the top of the sleeve cap and just down the underarm seam here, as well as your hem. Obviously, the amount that you're drawing on depends on the seam allowance and hem allowance that is in your individual pattern, so do check that. The next step is that we're going to want to draw a horizontal line in line with the bicep. As I said before, the bicep line sits right where the stitching line for the underarm seam and the sleeve cap meet on both sides, and this line should be 90 degrees to the grain line, or square to the grain line. And you can work with a pencil. I'm working with Sharpie so that it's nice and clear. The next step is to find the halfway point of this line. So measure the line and plot the halfway point. And then you're going to want to draw a vertical line that again should be parallel to the grain line, this one, at a right angle to the bicep line, and it should go all the way to the sleeve cap, all the way down to the hem, just like so. So hopefully you can now see the red dotting line, that's my stitching line, and I've also got that at the hem for my hem allowance. And then I have got my vertical line and my horizontal bicep line. The next thing that I would like you to do before we go any further is to take a copy of this. Trace this out. You can either trace it off, or if you're like me, you can just print another one of the same thing. So I've got that as my backup if I need it to check the shape of the sleeve cap when we finish with the adjustment. We're now going to grab a pair of scissors and we're going to do some cutting. I would like you to cut this vertical line from the stitching line up to the stitching line here. So we're not cutting all the way through the paper. The same goes for this bicep line. We're cutting it from the stitching line all the way across to the stitching line on the other side. Now this is tricky to do to start with. I generally pinch the paper slightly and that gets me started. But if you would rather use a craft knife or even a rotary cutter, just protect your table when you're doing that and you can use those instead. So I'm cutting all the way up to, but not through, the stitching line at the top of the sleeve cap, and exactly the same all the way down to the stitching line at the hem, and also along the bicep lines to the stitching line, but not through. So not through into the seam allowance. If you're working with a pattern that doesn't have seam allowances, then you are welcome to cut all the way through to the edge, but you want to make sure that you leave a tiny piece of paper, sort of a hinge, right at that edge. So 2 millimeters, a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch, something like that. Now, once you've cut horizontally and vertically, there's another little bit that we need to cut before we can begin working with this to remove some paper or fabric right in the center of the bicep. We need to cut into the seam allowances. So at the hem here, you're going to want to cut from the edge of the paper up to the stitching line, but not through. We need to leave a hinge at the stitching line. So about 2 millimeters, a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch of a hinge at that stitching line, because we do not want the stitching line to change. And we're also going to do that at the biceps and at the sleeve cap. So all of the edges need to have a little hinge on the stitching line. And do be cautious with your pattern, especially if it is from tissue paper, because you don't want it to break. Now, as a starting point, I've got a piece of paper that I'm going to pop underneath my sleeve, and I've drawn a vertical and horizontal black line. Now, these lines are useful, they're not necessary, but they are useful in order to help you to position the same vertical line of the sleeve onto this vertical line here, and the bicep line of the sleeve onto this line. It means that you don't throw the sleeve off at all. Now, I've also drawn a little dotted line in red here that's 1 inch, and that's the overlap that we're aiming for. I'm aiming to remove 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters from the middle section of the sleeve. So let's grab our sleeve pattern. Now, what we want to achieve here is that we want the top part of the sleeve cap, that vertical line, the stitching line where the hinge is, to be on the black vertical line. And I'm just going to pop a weight down on that. And the same with the hem. You want that stitching line at the hem, that line, to be on the black vertical line. And then the black line is exactly the same. You want those bicep points to be sitting on the black horizontal line here. Now, you can either use weights to hold it in place, or if you've got, say, a cork mat or something, you can actually pin into the pattern, and that's really useful. But you will find it just takes a little bit of fiddling to get this all sitting right. So what we also need to do here is we need to remove this inch. So we need to overlap these pieces, it doesn't matter which way they overlap, and we want to try and overlap them by that inch. So that means that the one piece underneath is sitting on the one side of the line that I've drawn, and the piece on the top is sitting on the other side of the line. Whilst I do that, you will see that the bicep line here has opened up and the shape of the cap has got more curve to it. If your paper isn't sitting flat anywhere, you may find that you actually need to clip in to those seam allowances to make a smaller hinge. So I'm going to now try and position everything on the line. So I've got the top point there. My overlap is pretty much spot on here. And I want to get the bicep in the right place. So you will find it is quite fiddly, and just bear with it getting everything in the right place. Just like so. When you're happy, you can start taping everything down. And there you have it. You have removed some of that fabric from the bicep. We went with 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters in total. I used my ruler to reconnect the black line from the top of the piece of paper through the middle down to the hem. And this would also be my grain line. My grain line was parallel with this line, if you remember. Now, we haven't actually altered the stitching line around the sleeve cap, so you will find that this will still fit into the original garment. However, we have changed the shape slightly. It's actually slightly higher in terms of the height of the sleeve cap than it was before. Now, for an adjustment of 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters, you should find that this will work. However, if you need to make more of an adjustment, you may find that you need to retrace the top of the sleeve cap from the original sleeve pattern, because this will become too high and perhaps won't work on your figure or in the garment that you're working with. So let me show you how you would do that. Now, with this example, I've gone and taken a greater amount in the centre of the bicep here, and you will see that it has actually made the top of the sleeve cap very high and very shaped. So what would you do in these circumstances? You would take your traced off copy, which I've now put into tracing paper, and I would line up the horizontal and vertical lines, just like so. And then I would trace off the top of the sleeve cap. I will obviously need to lower the height, so I will do that. And I'm drawing around the edge of the sleeve cap, which is not the stitching line, remember. So I've now drawn on the edge of the pattern in black. And I've also measured in my stitching line, which is 5/8 of an inch, 1.5 centimeters in this pattern, and I've drawn that on with a dotted red line. Now, what we would need to do next is we would need to measure the stitching line for the front of the armhole and the back of the armhole, and we would need to compare these to the original. We will have made the stitching line smaller by dropping the top of the sleeve cap. Therefore, we will need to make the armhole smaller in the garment as well, so that the sleeve still fits into the original garment. Now, to measure the stitching line on a sleeve, you're going to want to use your tape measure and put it on its edge. I actually copied the top notch down from the original position and checked that it was the same as on the traced off pattern, which it was. So you're going to measure from the top notch all the way around for the front and the same for the back, so that you then have two measurements that you can compare to the armholes on the body. So I've now got the back pattern piece out, and I have drawn my stitching line around this armhole as well. Now I could measure this and compare it to the back armhole of the sleeve. Out of interest, I measured the original sleeve back armhole and measured the change. The original one was 9 inches. The one that we've changed, we've brought lower, is 8.5 inches. So we have lost 1/2 inch. Therefore, I would need to reduce the armhole here by 1/2 inch as well. My options are that I could raise the armhole, that I could bring the armhole in here. That's going to depend on your shape and how the armhole currently fits you. Or you could do a little bit of both. You could raise it a little bit and bring it in a little bit. Now, I would recommend that you make these amendments so that your sleeve and the armhole have the same difference that they did originally before you amended the pattern. Now, generally speaking, the sleeve will be larger than the armhole. The amount larger that it is will depend on the pattern that you're working with and the designer. My personal preference for a dress or a garment like this is that the sleeve will totally be ½ inch, 1.2 centimeters larger than the total armhole. I then divide that in the front and the back, so I make my back sleeve measurement ½ inch, 5 millimeters larger than my back armhole measurement, and the same for the front. So you would make those amendments and you would true your sleeve. I will pop a link here to my sleeve truing video that shows you how to measure them and also how to make sure that your curve is very similar around the bottom of the sleeve. You will also need to re-add the notches onto the sleeve. They may have moved, so you will measure and position them again. Personally, I position my notches on the stitching line from the underarm, 3 inches, 7.5 centimeters up for the front, and one notch at 3 inches, 7.5 centimeters, and the other at 3 1/4, 8 centimeters for the back, so that you have 2 for the back. So there we have the major adjustment that you could make and how to make sure that the sleeve fits into the armhole. Now, before we finish, let's have a quick look at what you would do if you're working with a short sleeve. So if you're working with a short sleeve, you would want to do exactly the same technique. The only difference here is that you would cut straight up from the base or the hem of the short sleeve, simply because you want to make an adjustment to this area too. This area is quite close to the bicep, so you're going to want to remove the fabric at the bottom of the sleeve as well as in that central bicep area. Otherwise, it's exactly the same technique as I've just shared with you. Thank you ever so much for watching this tutorial. I really hope that you enjoyed it and you feel more confident when it comes to making bicep amendments in the future. Thanks for watching and see you soon.